Alright guys, welcome back. So in this video we're going to be finishing off that LG Stickley inspired settle. So I'm starting off by making the seat supports. So I decided to do sliding dovetails for the seat supports just because I wanted this thing to be quite literally bulletproof. Rather than doing a dado and just fitting a piece in, the sliding dovetail and the conflicting geometry within the sliding dovetail makes the seat supports extremely strong. So you can see here in the dry fit up, they just slide right in perfectly, but remember this moment because it gets a little bit more interesting during the glue up. The next part, after the sliding dovetails were ready, was to set up the drawboard dowels. So all I did here was mark out holes on the outside of the mortises where I could then drill in with the Forstner bit. And so I'm using 3/8 dowels here. I like 3/8 dowels because they're fairly small and easy to work with. And so I went through, cut the holes with the Forstner bit, then cut into the tenons with a spade, no, I don't know what these bits are, a brad point bit, that's it. And that way they were all perfectly set up. Then I could use my Veritas dowel maker, which I absolutely love this thing. This is the first product I've gotten to use it on, and it just does such a good job of dowels. In the past, you've seen me use just a steel bar and pounding a piece of wood through that. It didn't work very nicely. This thing works beautifully. And then once the drawboard dowels were all ready to go, I could start working on the curvature of the top rail. So again, I had a little template made up with just a paper this time where I could trace it out, and then I could go in with the bandsaw, remove the majority of the waste. And once the bandsaw did most of the work, I took it over to the oscillating spindle sander and just worked those edges down nice and smooth. Now I wasn't super worried about symmetry or perfect accuracy on this. I just wanted it to overall have a very even balanced look and just kind of look good. I wasn't super worried about it because it's a nice long space, so any variance would be blended in over that distance. And then it was on to the finishing process, or the initial finishing process anyways. Going through hand planing every possible surface, breaking all the edges with my block plane, and I did this on every single piece. It took quite a while, but is one of the most satisfying things because most other people would spend this time sitting there sanding and sanding and sanding, and you'd have to have hearing protection on with the shop vac running in the background. Just not a good time, whereas I got to relax using my hand planes, and it gives a way better surface. On the back of the legs where I couldn't fit my hand plane, I went for the card scraper. Now again, this is very important to work with the grain, and you just slowly scrape away to get it nice and smooth. And anywhere, again, same thing with the edges, I just had to use a card scraper to clean up around, right on the bend of the back legs. And then I gave everything a quick burnishing with some 4/0 steel wool. This works really well with an all-oil finish because it burnishes the surface, which makes it a little bit shinier than sandpaper. So I really liked using steel wool where I can. And then it was time for the first coat of finish. So this first coat is really just to make sure I get all the areas that are going to be hard to get to after the glue up. Also, the first coat of finish helps glue not to stick to areas I don't want it to stick to. So if there's a little bit of squeeze out from the glue up, I can easily peel it off or wipe it off with a damp rag and not have to worry about damaging the wood. And you can see just how nice the walnut came out with that finish on it. And then it was glue up day. So the first sliding dovetail, it went together pretty much perfectly. Just a few dabs of glue on the inside and right on the tail end just to make sure this thing doesn't come apart, and it slid together perfectly well. The second one is where it got interesting. Now this one was kind of tight when I was working on it initially, but you can see just how much I had to beat this thing basically to death to try to get it in. I'm not hitting it gently, and I had to hit it a lot. So it was kind of a pain. It was definitely a stressful moment, and this was literally the second thing I had to do during the glue up. It was not this time. So eventually I figured out that I could get it in, and then using this smaller piece, I could use that to get a little bit more leverage on it, and I was able to get it right into place. And it wasn't that bad once I got going with it. And eventually I got it in. So one of the things I will say about this glue up that I really like is the fact that I didn't have to use a single clamp. By draw boring the Morse tenons. Now, if you don't know what draw boring is, check out the Third Coast Craftsman. He does an absolutely amazing video about this. but basically you're just offsetting the dowel hole on the tenon, so it pulls everything together when you pound that tenon in. It's extremely strong and just means that you don't have to use clamps. So it was definitely much easier that I didn't have to worry about tightening clamps or doing anything. I just had to get the tenons into the mortise and then pound in a dowel. And so with the back assembly glued up, off camera I glued together the front assembly, which you can see behind me there. And then it was time to put in the side stretchers. They were the exact same thing, all drawboard mortise and tenons, so you just put a little glue on the tenon, drop it in, and then glue on the pound in the dowel. And then gluing the whole thing together was a little bit stressful, but not too bad. And the very last thing to do with these was to just clean up all the dowels. So just cutting them off with my flush cut saw, and then clean them up with the block plane. And you could really barely tell that they were there, except for that beautiful little bit of end grain. So one thing I will mention is that these are ash dowels, so they do blend in extremely well. They're just kind of a nice subtle detail. The final thing for this project was to put together the arms and corbels. So the arms have this nice sloping curve to them. Where again, this one I actually just did freehand, and then I mimicked it from one arm to the other, which has worked out really well. So I use a drawing bow, a straight, all your typical marking tools to mark out the curve and the back angle and this little, I don't know, it's not really a mortise, but kind of really a half lap either, but where it connects to the back rails of the bench. And then I just worked down all the edges and smooth out the curve between the oscillating belt sander and a card scraper. From here I had to do my first through Morse tenon in a while. I haven't done one since that cherry bookcase, and this was very stressful because this is a much more visible one. So I just, again, took the time to use a 1-inch Forstner bit to drill the hole, and then finished it off with the 1/2-inch mortise chisel. So once I got it all together and I put it on the bench, I found that the top of the leg was just a little bit too tall. So with this 1/4-inch Sapelli spacer, I used my flush cut saw to cut into it, leave a little bit about a 1/4 inch above the arm, and then use my block plane to add a chamfer to all the top edges. The last thing to do was to fit in the little walnut spacers. So these are all just over 1 inch wide, and they're perfectly fitted into the gap between the back rails here. And so they're just a spacer to keep these things apart. And so with a little dab of super glue on the top side, which goes flush into the groove, they held in perfectly well. And then I got to start doing some upholstery. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with upholstery. I've done smaller stuff before, just as a practice stuff, but this was the first kind of big thing I've done. So overall, it wasn't too hard. This is a piece of 3-inch foam that I ordered off Amazon. And I found out later that I did overpay for it, so if you're doing upholstery, definitely check out your local stores. But the foam was pretty good anyway. And so I got this brown wool polyester blend fabric from Fabricland. It's 15% wool, 85% polyester, so it feels lovely. It's a nice soft fabric, and so all I had to do here was just cut out a 30-inch piece because I bought way more fabric than I thought I did. In total, I've got 4 meters of fabric. This thing is 51 inches wide, so I've got brown, beautiful fabric for many projects to come. So you'll be seeing this stuff again soon. So the idea here is to just tack it in place, and as you pull everything tight, you want to just slowly work around the edges, tacking things in. Now I'm using 5/8 staples in my air stapler here. That way they go just through my 1/2-inch plywood and hold in really well. And so one of the things I learned when I was in cadets when I was younger was how to do hospital corners, and that actually came in kind of handy here because I knew how to fold the fabric in to get a nice, tight, clean-looking corner. Something that I think my sergeants back then would have been proud of. Although it was quite a bit easier that I could hold it together with staples. Couldn't do that in the metal bed frames back then. And so you can see here, I fitted the piece of plywood off camera, so by making everything fit to that piece of plywood, just with about a 3/16 gap on all sides of the plywood, you can see how easily this cushion fit into the bench, and it doesn't sag or move around when I sit on it, and so it's pretty good. Again, off camera, I attached the corbels. They're not held in with anything super excessive, just the 2 dowels, and then I had to clean up the dowels with a chisel, just because I could not get a block plane in that tight area. The last thing to do was to go over this thing with 400 grit sandpaper. This just knocks down any rough edges, anything left over, and apply the final coats of finish. So overall, this project went insanely well. I am so overly excited about how this project looks. Everything from the back walnut rails to the mortise and tenon joinery to the corbels underneath the arms. Everything just came together so perfectly well. And this just goes to show why ash is one of my favorite woods. It's got a lot of very intricate, interesting grain patterns to it that just stand out so well when you get that oil on it. And so it holds up really well, is beautiful to work with, and gives you such an amazing result. So I hope you guys enjoyed this project. I've got some other really cool ones coming up in a little bit here, but this is the end of the first Settle project.